One of the things that I have loved about living here in Arizona since I've moved to this state 7 years ago, especially down in Tucson, is the night sky. It is designated as a dark sky city, and there's not a lot of light pollution. I love walking my dog at night in our neighborhood because I get dizzy just staring at the stars in the sky. I've tried explaining this to my friends and my family back home in Kentucky, that in a city of almost 1 million people, I can see stars. Just last week, I was able to almost make out the entirety of Orion in my backyard. My friends and family don't believe me, so I tell them, come on out so you can see it to believe it. We're a postmodern people, and we don't believe things without proof. And even then, when proof, data, facts come out, even if they slap us right across the face, we have a hard time believing. So many times we have heard this scripture, and we jump all over our friend Thomas, and we call him Doubting Thomas. I mean, why would he doubt? His friends just told him what they experienced. Shouldn't he just believe it because they said it? I know we all like to believe and think that we would have been one of the 11 disciples who just immediately believed, right? But I'll ask you this question. Do you believe everything your friend posts on Facebook? Okay, then my sermon is over. But we totally just skip over the first part of this pericope just so that we can jump all over our friend Thomas, who didn't believe. Because we all like to get to point one of these fingers at someone else and say, at least I'm not as bad as that guy. That's why I pointed down the middle. But we like to identify ourselves with the disciples that we think didn't doubt. You know, we somehow have overlooked the opening part of this pericope. We somehow overlook that Jesus enters a room that is locked. And we tend to think that when that happens, the disciples would just say, hey, that's Jesus. That isn't how it happened at all. The other 11 disciples did not believe at first. I'm pretty sure of. I'm sure that if the phrase existed back then, when someone walked in and said, peace be with you, they would have said, that's fake news. We just watched Jesus die. You'd assume that if they had been with a guy for 3 years, they would have been able to see that it was him. But no, Jesus even had to show the wounds to those 11. Jesus knew the disciples had to see facts for themselves. And let's also remember that the 11 disciples, Thomas isn't there yet, had 3 signs shown to them before Thomas received his 2. The first sign, Jesus says, peace be with you. It's kind of Jesus' catchphrase. And since it is WrestleMania weekend, I'd be remiss if I didn't say that this is kind of like Jesus telling everyone, do you smell what Jesus is cooking? So after he said his catchphrase, he still had to show his wounds to his disciples. That's 2 signs. And the third came, well, before all of that, when Jesus entered a locked room. Jesus had to show the disciples, not only because it is human nature to question, but because it is human nature to deceive. And I think our nature to deceive forces our nature to question. There was a church I served in seminary, and just a few years before I arrived there, they had to file criminal charges against their treasurer for embezzling over $60,000. And now they have 2 treasurers, one who signs the checks and one who writes the checks. It's not a bad practice, actually. But, those large checks that are kind of unannounced, that aren't regular electric bills and mortgage payments, well, those all have to be approved by the board now. All because the church had been deceived. Another church I know fired its pastor for taking advantage of their position by having an inappropriate relationship with a parishioner, using their pastoral authority for their own gain. And now that church is anxious about calling any pastor to come in and lead them. And because of all of these situations, all disciple ministers like myself have to get a very expensive and in-depth background check when entering the search and call system. This next example is something that not a lot of even lifelong disciples know about our history, and it is a little bit traumatic for those of us that do know this piece of our history. But did y'all know that Jim Jones, yes, that Jim Jones, was a disciples pastor, trained at the same seminary that I went to, Christian Theological in Indianapolis. And the People's Temple, that was a disciples congregation in Indianapolis.
Okay, love you, buddy.
Thanks to that and all of that, the region of Indiana now has some of the strictest ordination policies for disciples. They had been deceived. They didn't want to find out the wounds afterwards. Because of these wounds, we disciple pastors have to go through boundary training. Some regions require mental fitness tests and mental health diagnoses before becoming ordained. Churches just don't assume someone is safe just because of their title. They need to see the evidence. They are asking to see the wounds. We as people are so well attuned to deception that we have to see the wounds. We don't trust. We have to have visible evidence of something in order for it to be true. The old question, if a tree falls in the woods and there's no one there to hear it, does it make a sound? Absolutely it makes a sound. And we know that it does, and yet we ask the question, and people will still deny that it does. And if there's one thing that I've enjoyed in my life, is a good, weird conspiracy theory. Now, my joy in these conspiracy theories has been stolen in the last few years because I've seen the damage that they can do to people and what they can do to our country. But still, I think there's some kind of generally harmless conspiracy theories that will still bring me joy. For example, over the last few years, people have come out of the woodwork claiming that they believe that the earth is flat. These flat earthers we've learned a lot about. They believe that because of how they perceive the world, that the world must be flat. It's level. How is this? They think NASA, the moon landings, space exploration is all just some big government ruse to hype up the big grand conspiracy that the earth is a globe. I mean, why would we believe that? They believe that the North Pole is not the northernmost point of the earth, but rather the center. And Antarctica is not the southern pole, but rather a wall that keeps us in. I don't agree with any of that. But I will give them credit where credit is due. They are going to find those facts on their own. They believe that they have been so deceived by science, by their teachers, by their government, by their families, that they must see the so-called globe for themselves because they've never seen it. So it's not true yet. They want to see and touch this globe for themselves. Otherwise, it's more deception. One of them was even bold enough to build his own rockets, so that he could fly high enough to see the edge of the world. He had tested 3 rockets. Each one didn't get high enough to confirm his thoughts. And the third rocket, well, it crashed, and he did not survive. But in the documentary leading up to that last attempt, the man was fully aware of the risk that he was taking, openly talking about his possible death. Y'all, we are so aware of deceit that we are willing to die to point it out. All of us at some point in our life have denied facts in pursuit of our own personal, political, religious, monetary, or self-sustaining gain. Could be a minor, or it could be pretty major. But we've all done it. Because no matter what facts come out, our natural instinct is to react to deception. That's why many people will never give a beggar on the street money. Well, that sign he says that he's hungry, but I know he's going to go spend it on booze. Meanwhile, you pull into the liquor store. Deception is a problem that we, the Church Universal, have to face. Not only the deception that I laid out earlier from my fellow clergy people in their own pursuit of their own gain, but deception from fact. Christianity far too often shouts at science, calling science a test from God to see if we believe either science or the Bible, calling fact deception from the devil. Christians shout at love and call it false love and a form of deceit from the devil. Shouting at peacemakers because the need for self-protection, material possession, or resource gathering will win out. Calling peace an idealistic deception of the mind. Because many Christians doubt clergy, doubt science, doubt love, doubt peace, and doubt equality, we are quickly fading into the background and fading away. Because Christians today are staring at the facts, the wounds in the hands of science, of love, of peace and equality, and still denying. Christianity isn't Thomas. Christianity has become worse than Thomas. Thomas says, I will believe when I can see and touch the wounds. And yet Christians today can see and touch the wounds of our world, the facts, the data, the pain, the hunger, and still deny. Friends, I don't like to think of us as a people of the cross, but rather as a people of the empty tomb, an Easter people, a people of resurrection. And if we're going to continue to be Easter people, we have to stop living in denial. Because resurrection is real, new life is real. Thomas doubted, and so did the other disciples. Because it's natural. But to be stuck in denial after seeing, that's a problem. Ask to see the wounds so that you can confirm, but don't deny. We can't see the future of this church or of the Church Universal. And there are people that are skeptical about the long-term future of the Church Universal. And that's natural because of the evidence that we see. The numbers are in decline. Our voice is being diminished. We see the gospel being misused and abused. And so we skeptics may say something like, I will not believe until I see with my own eyes. But y'all, I believe this about the future of the church. Our future is seen by looking into the wounds of the world, because we can see, we can feel, and when we see and we can feel, we have to say, we believe. How can we support? The church's resurrection isn't in the denial of new realities. The church's resurrection is in seeing the new reality and moving forward with love, with peace, with welcome, and moving forward as God invites us forward. I believe this to be so beyond true, that the future that God has for this world, for our church, is something we will have to see just to believe. Amen.